Okay, so we left off at the very top of Lamed Amid Beis. We talked about the pasuk that where the Mishnah says that a zaken, a choshev, an older person, does not have the same requirements of a shavas aveda because of the double word v'hisalamta. That there are times when you may actually sort of let it pass by, and sometimes not. And the Gemara tried to figure out what was the case where you could. So we talked about maybe a Kohen and a Beis HaKvaros, or we talked about where someone's giving up more money to help someone else and lose more money himself by giving up that time. And both of them were sort of not rejected, but we said, no, that wasn't it. And we left with that's how we came about saying, so that's where we're going to pick up on the top of Lamed Amid Beis, the second line. So now that we have established that a zaken does have certain exemptions, the Gemara is going to tell us a little, and again, this whole next daf and a half is really getting into the weeds of understanding some of these concepts. So, for instance, what is that exemption of l'fichvoda? Omer Rabba, says Rabba, Hakisha chayva. That let's say a zaken saw an animal that was just idling, and he said, it looks like it may be lost. So he takes a clump of dirt and he throws it at the animal. I mean, we've all done that. So once he does that, he has already started the process, and he's has to finish it. Now, let's say just happenstance, he took the clump of dirt and he threw it, figuring, okay, I'll throw the clump of dirt, the animal will move to where it's supposed to be, and everything will be good. Says the Gemara, Hakisha chayiv ba, that if you Hakisha, says Rashi Hakisha, zeh she'ena lefi chvodo, for an elderly or a zaken, if Hakisha hako achas, just one hit, one throw, lahashiva, to return it, nischayev bo lahadura hol v'hischil. So the Gemara is establishing a statement that once you start it, you have to finish it. Now, Abaya Havi Yosef Kami de Rabba. Abaya was the Talmud of Rabba. Rabba was the Gadol Hador. So Abaya was sitting in front of Rabba. He saw these goats that were just hanging around. Shakal kala b'shadava. So he took again some dirt or something, and he threw it at the goats. Amalei. So Rabba said to mechayev baha kuma hadrina. You're mechuyev and go up and return it. So in other words, your chashivas ends where you begin with an action, and if that action is to try to get the goats or whatever it happens to be, livestock, to go back to its owner, you have to finish what you started. So that's established now, okay, that you have to continue and you have to finish. Now, so the Gemara so that's okay, we've now established that. Now the Gemara is going to try to establish another point. So they asked the Kasha in the base Medrash, let's say there was an Adam Chashuv who lived out in the suburbs, which we call Basade. Let's call it Basade, meaning in the outer suburbs where there aren't many people. There, he wasn't afraid for his covet, because if he did something, probably most people wouldn't even know it, because it's so sparsely populated. But he does not do anything in the city, because in the city, that's where everybody sees him, and so he doesn't do anything. So the Gemara has asked the question: mahu. So what's the kasha? The kasha is, if he is in the sadeh, and let's say there's an animal there, and the owner is in the city, does he have any responsibilities? Because in the sadeh, l'chayra, he should be able to do something. In the sadeh, he shouldn't be constrained because he's not being closely sort of watch. So the idea of his covet may not be impugned in the Sadeh as it is in the city. So what's the kasha? Mi yomrinan hashava ma'alya v'inan. Do we say that we need a complete hashava, a complete return? And since he is not required or does not do anything in the city because of his covet, so therefore you can't be machayev him to start in the sadeh when he can't finish in the city. So that's the kasha. The kasha is, if you can't do a complete, are you mechayev at all? Or dilma b'sadeh mihu dechayev. Or maybe we go, no, in the sadeh where he would initiate the return, he is mechayev. Given the chayev le b'sadeh, chayev lo be'ir. And since you started in the sadeh, and we just got through saying that once you start, you have to finish, then, so what's the story? What should he do? So the Gemara answers teku. The Gemara says, we don't have an answer, but the question is an interesting one because you have competing concepts. The one concept is that he has no achrayus in the city. So since he can't complete, you can't make him start. That's the kasha. You can't make him start what he cannot complete because he can't complete in the city. Or no, since in the sadeh he would be able to start, and we have a competing cloud that once you start, you have to finish. Now we have to make him finish. So that's the teku. The teku really is which of those competing sort of doctrines is the true one in this situation. This is an interesting question, and it's teku. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on it, but you know, this is where the Gemara winds up saying that we really don't necessarily know which of those two is more compelling.
I'm trying to think of mens rea and actus reus, and you know that in civil law, if you both had in mind, let's say, to kill someone, and you try and load the gun, but the gun jams, you don't have the final actus reus, right? Over here, that's the basic point is when he threw a pebble at the goat, he took an interest and he acted on that interest. Does that count whether or not he could carry it to its fruition?
But you see, there was a doctrine established that once you start throwing the pebble.
Right. But that's the machlokes. If once you had initially the start of it, even if you can't complete the actus reus, are you chayav, right?
But look at the other side. The other side questions whether he even has to start in the field because you know he can't finish. In other words, he didn't throw the pebble.
I see. It's whether he's even mechuyev to throw the pebble.
He's mechuyev to throw the pebble because in the sadeh he's completely like everybody else.
Got it. Yeah.
Right. So that's really the question: is whether or not he has to step up.
I was missing that. Yeah.
What's the idea? He's trying to throw this pebble to get the goat out of the road, where
to get the goat to walk towards its owner.
Oh,
in other words,
wake the goat up. Wake it up.
Yeah,
right. That's what Rabbah says. That it's crucial whether he's just throwing a pebble to get the goat off of his land, the Zokein's land, as opposed to heading him specifically in the direction of the owner. It gets more complicated if it's in the sadat or the ear at that point.
Well, so Rick, we're going to have a more detailed discussion about where the animal is. There's a lot of options where that animal is, but for our purposes, we're going to assume it was just along the side of the road, and he's sort of standing there because the Gemara is going to go into great detail. How do you know it's lost? There's even a more basic question: how do you know it's lost?
Yeah.
So we're going to assume that he saw that it was lost, and he wanted to help it go by throwing that pebble.
Does the Gemara resolve the whole notion of how it's that I'm a little stuck on? Is it that it's not coveted for a zakein? Is it in more into that of why specifically? Is it because of possible infirmity in the part of the old man, or
there's a certain covet that comes with it being a zaken. He's also talking about a Talmud Chacham. In other words, a person of stature who there are times. Again, remember we have we said last week that we have the word v'hisalamta, that you should look away twice. We said one is a positive, one is a negative. The negative is that for everybody else, you can't look away. The positive is that for a zaken, for a certain person, you can look away. So that's the word hisalamta. So having said that you can look away, the question is, now, in the case of the field, it would seem that there's no reason why a zaken should not engage, because in the field he's all alone. So if he's all alone, then he should be like, he should try to fulfill the mitzvah of Hoshef Teshiveh. But then we arrive with the problem. Once you start and you have to finish, where it's not kavadik, then what does he do? So that's the teku, because we have the opposite sides of the coin, each of which has a merit. So let's take a look at Rashi. There's no embarrassment, there's no busha, because there's no one out there in the field. In other words, so in the city where everybody is there and they know him and he's chashuv, it would be somewhat of an embarrassment for him to be, trying to shoo these goats towards the owner. Mahu, shechayev lahashiva, are you mechuyev to return? And for the Gemara teku, we don't have an answer, and we're going to have to wait. So anyway, that's the machlokes, and it's a really interesting machlokes that the Gemara brings down. Okay, so now we've established two things. One, that there is such a thing. Yeah.
Maybe this is not an appropriate question, but if we have two zakanim living side by side, and one is weak, what's that?
Two what?
Two zakanim.
Two zakanim. Yeah.
They're neighbors.
Yeah.
And one is struggling with disabilities or whatever, and the other one has no problems. So the other one, does he have to be concerned that he's embarrassing the ones who can't do it because he can do it outside in public? Whatever it is, cut your grass or anything like that.
Yeah.
Is there such a sensitivity that you have to be sensitive for the neighbor who can't do it?
Yeah, that is a, let's call that in the category of a chesed. In other words, that would be something of a kindness that he might or might not doing, but that's up against the halacha. The halacha is Hoshef Teshiveh. That's your responsibility. That's your first responsibility. Now you ask a good question, sensibilities about someone who might be embarrassed if he does it or doesn't do it to someone else. And that's a very noble concept, but it doesn't overrule the mitzvah in the Torah. So if he can do it and he wants to do it, you're worried about embarrassing or making the other fellow feel bad. That's a secondary consideration. It's noble, but it's secondary to the actual mitzvah. So the Torah tells us Hoshef Teshiveh, but you have an exemption. Now, if you choose, remember, a zaken can choose to waive the exemption. He can say, I'm a zaken, but still I have this mitzvah, and Zrizim Magdimim, and he wants to run to the mitzvah, like Avraham Avinu, who was 99 years old, and he ran to service the guests who were coming. What person would do that? I mean, especially in the hot sun and a hot day. Why would he do it? Tarot says because there is a certain a yid has that certain drive that he's mechuyev, and to the best of his ability, he wants to not rely on exemptions, let's say, and do the best he can. You can rely on the exemption and be perfectly fine. You have not violated any principle whatsoever, but in your heart of hearts, you say, I missed the mitzvah. That's how a yid thinks, I missed the mitzvah. How do I make it up? So I think that's the mitzvah would trump it, I would say, Jay, that, you first have to do the mitzvah, and then you have to think about your fellow man. Okay. So that's how we leave the Gemara. Now, okay, weiter. Amar Rava. So again, these are all different nuggets that we're going to pick up here on this whole inyan of the chashivas of a zaken. Amar Rava, kol shebishalo machzir b'shal chavero name machzir. So Rava now is going to give us sort of a black letter law, we call it in the law. He's going to tell us definitively what's the principle. In other words, in any circumstance where he himself would return it, in other words, if it was his own object, let's say it was his own, what would he do? So that's the yardstick by which you measure it. If he would do for himself, it's like B'hafta l'reacha, then you have to do for your friend. You can't distinguish between what you would do for yourself and what you do for your friends. So the culture b'shalom machzir, b'shal chaver machzir. The culture b'shalom porek v'toen, b'shal chavero nami porek v'toen. So what's porek v'toen? Let's take a look at Rashi. So porek v'toen, says Rashi, porek masa min achamor. You, in other words, you take, if you see a donkey that sort of has fallen under its load, so you have to unload it. So porek means to unload. Porek masa min achamor. You unload it, and then in other words, you now give the chamor a break, and now you want to have him load again, v'toen alav, and then you put it back on. Diksiv also tazav hakim takim. It says twice hakim takim. So in other words, if the donkey is laboring under the burden, so you have to first unburden and then put it back. You can't stop in the middle. Said, okay, I did mine, I unburdened, now the end. This is porek v'toen. And in that pasuk, now you have to go ahead and reload. So basically what he's saying is that the standard is what you would do for yourself. That's what you have to do for your friend, which makes sense. In other words, if you're already going to do it, then you can't distinguish between what you would do for yourself or what you would do for somebody else. Okay, so and that's how Rashi describes it. Okay. Now, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi have a ozel ba'urcha. Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi was walking along the way. Pogabahu gavra. So he met this fellow who was walking on the way. This is a very interesting piece of Gemara. Habedore pischa de ofe. So in other words, he was walking along the way, this fellow, and he was carrying a bundle of wood. Pischa de ofe, masoi shel eitzim, says Rashi. He was carrying a bundle of wood. Osvina v'kom mitfach, and it was a heavy load. So v'kom mitfach, says Rashi, omid lofish. He stopped to rest. It was a hot sunny day. He's carrying this big load of wood. He stops and he puts the wood down. Now, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi is a zaken. So what's he going to do? Is he okay? Can you make him go ahead and help this fellow? Amalei, so this fellow says, Dalale hatieni. That was, help me please to put this wood back on my back, or however he was carrying it. So he specifically asked Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi to help him. So now Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi is a zaken, and he didn't want to do it. So he came up with an idea. Amalei, kama shavin. How much is this bundle of wood worth? How much is it worth? Amalei palga de zuzah. It's worth a half a zuz, whatever a zuz is. It's a sizable amount. Maybe a zuz, but maybe it was $50, maybe it's $25. But palga de zuzah. So what did he do? Yoev le palga de zuzah ve'efkara. So Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi, that's why he was a Odom Chashiv and a Talmud Chacham. He said, here's the money, and it's now hefker. So what does it mean it's hefker? It's not yours anymore. Then there's no inyan of my helping you put it on your back because it's hefker. So by making it hefker, he's avoiding the issue. Okay? So that was a very smart thing he did. So what did this fellow do? He was no fool. Since it was hefker, he went ahead and he was zoiche, and he said, okay, it's hefker, anybody can own it, I'm taking it. So he quickly went ahead and took it. Now we're back to square one. So what did Rabbi Yossi do? He gave another half a buck. He gave another half a zuz. he did the same thing again. Va'afkire, and he made it hefker. So this went around a second time where he made it hefker, so he didn't have to engage. He saw that he was about to do it for a third time. The fellow was going to grab it again on Malay, so he made that. So Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yossi said, "Lokula alma afkerina." To the whole world, I'm making it hefker. V'lach loy afkerina. But to you, it's not hefker. So immediately he wanted to stop him from doing it. So he said, it's only hefker for everyone but you. So that was the story. That's what happened. Okay. So what's the Indian? What's the question? Frek the Gemara, miyave hefker kehai gavna. Is it really hefker? Can you make a statement? I'm making it hefker for the whole world except you. That's the question. Because he wanted to do an end around and say it's hefker, therefore I don't have to work with you. And the guy was equally smart by jumping on it. So he said to him, I'm making it hefker, but not to you. We learned in the Mishnah, Beis Shammai omrim hefker la'aniyim hefker. Beis Shammai says, hefker la'aniyim hefker, or Beis Hillel omer ein hefker ad hefker la'aniyim la'ashirim kishmita. In other words, there's a machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel whether a partial hefker is hefker. So, for instance, says Rashi. Let's look at the Rashi. Hefker la'aniyim have a hefker, says Beis Shammai. Afagav shelo hefkira elul aniyim. Even though you only made it hefker for the aniyim, have a hefker lemifta min amasa. The following halacha is that you have an item that would normally be tithed, and you make it hefker. Once you make it hefker, it no longer has to be tithed to the new owner. Whoever picks it up is now exempt from masa. So the question is, if you made it hefker, and because you wanted to make sure an oni got it, so you say hefker la'aniyim, is it hefker and is it potter min amasa? So that's the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Who do we hold like? We hold like Beis Hillel. That what? Beis Hillel says, Eina hefker achi hefker la'aniyim la'ashirim kishmita. Since the whole Indian of hefker is said together with the parsha of Shemitah, and Shemitah is something that befalls aniyim, ashirim, everybody has to follow Shemitah, which we're now in, Shemitah, right? That there's no distinction between aniyim and ashirim for Shemitah. So in other words, you can't do a partial hefker. So what was Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yossi thinking when he said, I'm making it hefker to the whole world except for you? There's no such concept. We hold like Beis Hillel, that one for all and all for one. Once you make it hefker, you can't make it partially hefker. So that's the kasha. The kasha is, what was Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yossi trying to do as a chachma here, which was very smart? How did he stop the fellow? So that's really the kasha of the Gemara, because we paskin like Beis Hillel. So now we're going to introduce something which the Gemara is going to tell us, and Amalei Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yossi l'kula alma efkerina over milsa ba'almahu. He was bluffing. Milsa ba'almahu. He was bluffing. What do they say? They say that he wasn't lying to him. He was bluffing. He said something that may or may not have had some efficacy. It did according to Beis Shammai, but we don't paskin like Beis Shammai. But he was hoping that by saying it, he would stop this fellow in his tracks. And the Gemara says that's a legitimate thing. You can do that, right? Isn't there something? I think my belief is that in Yale, you don't practice criminal law either, but I think if you say something that isn't true in order to get someone to say something, a confession or something else, that it's not improper. I mean, you're making a statement. And if someone takes the bait, he takes the bait. So here, Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yossi was making a statement, and the fellow took the bait. Okay, I can't, then I won't do it. But if he had done it, he would have been totally within his rights to do it, because the halacha is like Beis Hillel. So that's some insight for us into the Gemara, that sometimes you have to use a little trickery in order to again, he was hanging his hat on a minority opinion, he wasn't making it up because Beis Shammai says it's okay, but since we don't pass it like Beis Shammai, it wasn't really necessarily an appropriate thing. But nevertheless, that's how we got it. But had the fellow gone ahead and done it again, Shmuel Rabbi Yossi would have been in the same situation. That's really the upshot of what the Gemara is telling us. All right. So again, another nugget as to how we look at this whole question of the chashivas of a zaken. Okay. Frank the Gemara. All right. So now that we've established that he was within his rights to say it, says the Gemara. So, bottom line, it was still not lefi chvodo. So, what does he do? In other words, so how does he go ahead and get around that? Because at the end of the day, why was Rabbi Shmuel ben Yossi trying to find a way to get out of it? He could simply have said, "I'm a zaken and lefi chvodo." So, why is the Gemara telling us that he had to find a way to get out of it? Why did he have to find a way? He was totally within his rights. He was a zaken. So here the Gemara gives us a tremendous insight. And the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi lefnim mishuras hadin hu da'avid. Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi said, yes, I'm exempt. But lefnim mishuras hadin, I still want to be mekayim the mitzvah. This is what we said before, is that the mitzvah hoshev teshivein, even though you're exempt from it, nevertheless, it's a mitzvah in the Torah. You can certainly sort of hang your hat on the zaken lefi chvodo out, but he didn't want to. He wanted to find a way where it wasn't going to put him in a compromising position, and therefore he did this whole shtickle with the hefker. But he was lefnim mishuras hadin. Where do we know this from? The Tanna Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef learned from the pasuk. It says in the pasuk, "V'hadat lehem." In other words, the pasuk in the Torah tells us, I think it's in Devarim, tells us "V'hadat lehem es haderech yelchu ba es hamasa sheyasu." That the Torah is telling us. This was by in Shemos, not in Shemos, where when Yisro saw what Moshe Rabbeinu was doing. And he said, you have to ease your burden and you have to establish a court system, you have to establish a hierarchy. He was giving him advice. And the pasuk says, "V'hodata lahem," and you will teach them es haderech yelchu ba, to follow es hamasa sheyasu. Those are the words in the Torah in Parsha Shemos. So from there, we're going to learn out the following. V'hodata lahem ze beis chayeyem. This is a very important concept. You should teach them, says the Torah, you should teach them an umnus. From here we see that everybody is mechuyev to take his livelihood on his own back and to learn an umnus and not to rely on tzedakah. Okay? As much as we give tzedakah to Talmidei Chachamim and all of those wonderful things, which is a big mitzvah, you have a Farish pasuk that says that a person has to rely on his own wits. Beis chayeyem, you have to have a parnasa. Says Rashi, the Beis chayeyem lilmud lahem umnis, to teach them a profession or a umnis, a job. Lehisparnis ba, hukos v'soros kesive beresha dekro. So that's number one. Number one, everybody has to learn an umnis. So that's what you learn from Hodat Alehem. Es haderech, the way, zu gemilas chasadim. From here we learn out that everybody has to be a gomel chesed. Everybody has to do chesed. Asher yelchu, that you go, zeh biker cholim. Yelchu, you go with your feet. Where do you go? You go to be mevaka chola. You go to visit the sick and help them. Ba, zu kavura. You're mechuyev to be mekaber. You have to bury the dead. Right? You can't rely on somebody else. When it comes to kavura, you have to participate. Chevra kadisha, whatever it has to be. Ve'es hamase zehadin, the halacha. Asher yason zu lifnim mishuras hadin. So from that pasuk, you learn out all of these different requirements. The last one being the Fnim Mishur Sadin. Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi was a chassid and a tzaddik, and he said, you know what? Sure, I can hide behind Zaken Lefi Chvodo, but you see from the pasuk that there is such a thing as the Fnim Mishur Sadin, and I want to fulfill the Fnim Mishur Sadin. Therefore, rather than just hiding behind it, I did all the things that would give me a legitimate exemption. So it's a very interesting pasuk that the Torah teaches us, and that's why he did what he did. Okay, so again,
Question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Totally off the wall, and it's maybe we covered it someday, or maybe we'll cover it, but or maybe it just doesn't apply. But using this example, so the Zaken looked at it and said, you know what? I can't, it's below my position. I can't really physically do it. I'm going to give him the half a zuz to effectively take care of the problem. But because that's what the load was worth, great. But what if it was 5 zuz or 50 zuz, some much larger amount where he really couldn't be expected, even listening to Shor Sadin, to turn around and pay that kind of money just to take care of a mitzvah that he's not really obligated in? Could he pay a half, let's say the work involved be a half a zuz or a quarter zuz or whatever? Could he turn around to somebody else who's maybe ignoring the mitzvah, but who could do it, and pay that person to say, could you please go ahead and take care of this for me?
So in other words, what? So
no,
how
could
was
he
gonna
pay
do that?
somebody to be essentially be his shaliach to do the mitzvah?
In other words, and that person would pay the full amount of what it is.
No, he would pay the wages of what it would take for somebody else to help with this animal.
But he asked how much it's worth it.
Right, but I'm
Fair
saying
ex-
in
fair
this case, he
exchange.
asked out to worth it. He said, you know what, I'll just pay the amount, I'll buy the thing off of you and to solve it that way. But what if it was some huge, it wasn't straw, it was a load of diamond, you know what I mean? It's something very
But
expensive.
was the other fella going to pay the full value of what the diamonds were worth in order to make it happen? In other words, what's the chap here? Why?
No, I'm
why
saying
is it
it's
better if the other fella does it? Why is it better?
No. You have a zaken, and he's physically really not able to do it, and he's not required to do it.
Right.
Okay. In this case, he turned around, if I understand correctly, he said, what's this whole load worth? And he bought the load in order to solve the
And
problem.
therefore, there's no longer a requirement.
Right. Could he, though, as an alternative, could he turn around and say, you know what, I can't do this myself physically, but this is an expensive load, not a half a zuz that I could just say, okay, you know what, this will be part of my costs for the day, but a very expensive load, but where he also couldn't physically do it himself. Could he, though, would it be a mitzvah or in a sense, would it be
We
another?
have the concept of yesh shliach l'dvar mitzvah. In other words, you can make a shliach for a mitzvah.
Right. So could he go ahead and then pay somebody else who's walking by, who's, not inclined otherwise, he's busy, whatever, to go ahead and do the mitzvah, even though every Jew should? Could the zaken turn around and pay somebody else and say, hey, Shlomi, come over here. I'm going to pay you to go ahead and help this man with
I see what you mean. In other words, he'll pay him to help him load.
Yeah.
Yeah, why not? I mean, yesh shliach l'dvar mitzvah. In other words, if he can't do it, but he wants someone to do the mitzvah and he pays him to do the mitzvah, that's a shlichus, which is acceptable. Now I understand what you're asking, that someone else should put the load of wood on his back, and therefore to avoid the
right.
We still have the covenant issue here, because he's still going to be, so somebody puts it on his back, he's going to be schlepping the thing all over the place, so somebody else put it on his back.
Yeah,
no.
The issue is not. No. The question is, can you pay someone else to put it on his back? And the answer is yes. Why not?
Right.
Why not? Because it's a mitzvah to help him. I can't help him, but I can say I don't have to help you because I'm a zaken. But you know what? I'm going to help
Instead
you.
of saying
pay
that.
Shlomi to put it on your back, and therefore everybody will be happy. I'll pay the money, you'll get your wood, and everyone will be happy and go home. And the answer is, yeah, of course he can do that. I thought you were asking, can he pay the other guy to give him the money for the?
No.
I mean, no one's going to pay the 50 zuz, as a shlichus, but to help him get his wood back up on his back, yeah. But again, he wasn't required. But that's the Mishur's Hadin part of the equation. He said,
these sugyos would all be made so much easier if that other third person happened to walk by, but he never does.
That's when you need them, right? Okay, so yeah, so the answer is yes, that there is a shlichus of the bar mitzvah, and if you could pay somebody else to do it, you don't have to, but it's l'fnim b'shur sadin. Okay, so now we have another concept, l'fnim b'shur sadin, that we saw that he went the extra mile even though he didn't have to do it. Frek the Gemara Omamar. So okay, Omamar. So we just learned what 4, 5, 6 different mitzvahs from this pasuk. Why do you have to point out that Yelchu is Biker Chaylim? Isn't Biker Chaylim a Gemilas Chesed? Gemilas Chesed is an umbrella. What is it? Gemilas Chesed? Do kindness. It doesn't tell us what the kindness is. It says do kindness. Now, you can do kindness in many different ways, right? So the kasha is, why does the pasuk have to single out Biker Chaylim? That's a chesed. To go and help somebody in Mevaker Chayla. So why single it out? That's the Gemara's kasha. Why single it out? So the Gemara gives an interesting answer. Lo nitztucha ela leben gilo. That there's a general concept that when you're Mevaker Chayla, you help the chayla because you take away part of his illness. That's the general concept, that you're making him feel better and you're taking part of the illness away. Says the Gemara, and this is a little bit unique. You know when that applies? Leben Gilo. If you are, and Ben Gilo, let's take a look. Okay, so Rashi doesn't talk about that, but a Ben Gilo is someone who is in the same category as the Chayla for purposes of the astrological simanim. Now, if you're in the same astrological siman as a person who is ill, which means that you have sort of a kinship, that's the way we look at it, then you can be Mevaker Chayla and help him by taking Echad Mishishim, 1/60th of his illness. So in other words, that's the reason why you have to have Biker Chaylim, because Gemilas Chesed, that's fine. Everybody does Gemilas Chesed. But for a Ben Gilo, there's a specific mitzvah that if you're Mevaker Chayla, you can do what someone else can't do. So that's the answer to the kasha. Why does it single out the Biker Chaylim? Because it's Biker Chaylim for a specific type of person who can actually do more than somebody else. Everybody else can help and make him feel good and everything else. But a Ben Gilo can actually do more. So that's the Gemara's answer. Why we have to have Biker Chaylim. The Omar Mar Ben Gilo notel echad mishishim mechalyo. Okay. So in other words, yes, that it's a Gemilas Chesed, but it's a unique type of Gemilas Chesed that only certain people can do, and therefore we have to single it out. Okay. That's why he has to go be Mevaker Chaylim.
It was like blood type, lahavdil.
Yeah, exactly. In other words, everybody can be a general donor, but if you need a specific AB positive, and
You have a connection with him that nobody.
you have a connection to him that makes you much more, it singles you out, exactly. For and for that purpose, it's enough that the Torah, that we have to single out that particular thing. So he has to help him. And the boy on the mazel. And so now the Gemara says ba zu kvura. So ba, the word ba is that you're mechayiv to do kvura, and you can't rely on someone else to do that mitzvah. Freik the Gemara hanu gemilas chasadim. That's the same kasha. That's a gemilas chesed to do kvura, right? We call that a chesed shel emes. We call that a truthful chesed because there is no possible repaying. If someone were to say, I want to do a gemilas chesed, why? Because if I do, someone will reciprocate to me. Okay, it's a motive. It's not maybe the highest calling, but it certainly doesn't hurt, even if you have that in mind. But with kavura, you can't do that because the person that you're doing it to can't help you, right? You're burying him. He can't help you. So, Frank, the Gemara is a Gemilas Chasedim, and so the Gemara lo nitzbecha ela lezaken ve'eno lefi chavoda. So, in other words, the Gemara gives an answer that that even a zaken lefi chavodo has that mitzvah. In other words, the mitzvah of a Shabbos Aveda, okay, that's a mitzvah that is debatable. Okay, so maybe he doesn't have to do that, but kvura, even a zaken lefi chavodo, has the responsibility to be metapel, to be involved. He can't say, I'm a zaken, it doesn't pass for me to be involved in digging a hole or putting the, or being in the Chevra Kadisha or whatever it happens to be. So that there is no honor that stands in the way of being that mitzvah. Therefore, he singles it out. It's not just another Gemilas Chesed. Asher Yasun zu lefnim mishur sadin, and the last one is lefnim mishur sadin. Dam Rabbi Yochanan. So in other words, the last one is lefnim mishur sadin. That that's also a responsibility on everybody, even a zaken. So the Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Lo harber Yerushalayim ela al shedino ba din Torah. It's very interesting lashon that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. Why? Because Klal Yisrael was done through Bezdin. In other words, by following the halachas of the Torah and doing the right thing, the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. That's what it seems to say, right? Ela al shadano ba din Torah, because they did din Torahs and they followed the halacha, and the Gemara says, and that's why the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. I mean, that's how could you even wrap your head around that? That you did the right thing and the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed.
Yeah, but what it's telling them is you were lawyering up too much. Okay, you should have solved things without a din Torah.
Well, that may be one way of looking at it, but there are times when a din Torah is required, and you follow the halachas of the Torah, and now you're responsible for the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Right. So Rashi says, Dina the Mezikta Bitmia, the Mezikta Guza Hadonim Biyisurim, B'chazaka, B'chavera, B'vavakama. So that because you followed the halacha and you did everything according to halacha, are you telling me that that's the reason why the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed? Says the Gemara, no. And the Dina, the Megizza, the Dina. So in other words, it's not just. In other words, when we go to court, lahavdil, when we go to court, so our courts should be courts of justice and courts of equity. In other words, we have to have you have to have the element of rachamim as part of the din. You can't just be dayan according to the strict letter of the law without taking in mind the nuances, which is why when a bezdin sits, sometimes it looks like, I've seen it, it looks like the bezdin is taking license to maybe issue a judgment that doesn't necessarily follow the strict letter of the law. And the teretz is because that's not what they're required to do. They have to sit in judgment. And I repeated it, and it's a very famous story, which has a truthful element to it, with Rav Moshe, when he used to give psak halacha, and he used to, at times, it said from his Talmidim, would say that he would give piskei halacha for different people with different outcomes on the same circumstance. How could that be? The halacha is the halacha. It's either yes or it's no. It's black or it's white. So Rav Moshe would say that that's pshat in the halacha. The halacha is what it is. But we as human beings have to take our seichel and we have to include it in the halacha to understand that if there is leeway in a halacha, you can't always come out with the same results. As strange as that sounds, that's the emes. So there are times when an almana asks a shaila and you have to be more lenient, whereas someone else asks a shaila And you say, no, I don't have to be lenient. I can be a little bit stricter with you than I can with them. And it's perfectly okay. It's perfectly fine to do that. So as long as it's within the bounds of halacha. So when the Torah when they say, when they were inflexible, when the Beis Din didn't use its common sense to say we have to adjust within the halacha, we have to adjust. That's what the Churban Beis Hamikdash was for. It was Churban Beis Hamikdash because you didn't use your seichel to help people. Number one, that's your responsibility.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
this is Yale. If I could just share a story with Rabbi Einemer,
Yeah.
which I think is really on point. So we moved into a house, this is a while ago, and there was a dishwasher. The house had not been owned by Jews. My wife just assumed we have to replace everything. I said, call Rabbi Einemer. So Rabbi Einemer, we went to a discussion of what the makeup was, et cetera. He said, okay, Sarah, again, Sarah grew up here. She was a Talmidah of Rabbi Einemer. He knew her very well. So he said, okay, I'm going to give you my psak. This psak is only for you, okay? Because I understand you and et cetera. This is only for you. Don't share with anybody else, because if somebody else calls me with the exact same situation, it may be a different answer,
Right.
because I know you, I know how you'll follow through, et cetera. Not everybody is the same thing. So I just found it very interesting. It's the same, it could be the same question dealing with
Right.
the same inanimate objects,
Right.
but you get a different answer because you have to mold the halacha to the situation.
Exactly. So what's the punch? You're exactly right. Yeah. What's the punchline? That didn't do lefnim b'shur sadin. For some people, lefnim b'shur sadin is part of the answer. For some people, it's not. For some people, it is. So in your circumstance, where he knew who the person was, he knew it was your wife, and he said, "Okay, for you, this is the answer. It's not an answer that fits for everybody else." So again, that's the punchline here: is that the lefnim b'shur sadin, which is going the extra mile, may or may not fit the purpose or the circumstance. So there are times when it fits, and there are times when it doesn't fit.
And I've heard you, Rabbi Grauman, back when we had the Shiur on Shabbos at one point, phrase it as the goal of halacha is to try and get to yes if you can, not just say no on the strict parameters of halacha. It's no.
Exactly
You
right.
want to try and get to yes if there's
Exactly right. Jewish law, halacha, is not like other laws, because we see, how many times have we seen in our Gemara or in other Gemaras that we've learned where you have to go the extra mile to prevent someone from losing money? Where does it say that I have to prevent you from losing money?
Right.
It's not my responsibility. Carrots is that's the unwritten part of the halacha, is that I have to consider you like I consider me. I don't want to lose money. I don't want to be, in a situation where I'm compromised. I have to do I have to do the same for you. Who does that? Where do you see that? That's a concept that's specifically a Jewish concept. And where do we see it from? From this pasuk, where the punchline is lefnim b'shur sadin. Everything is the way it should be. You're a gentleman and a scholar and a talmid chacham and a fine yid, and you've accomplished it all. But then there is the pintala, the little pintala yud that says, you know what? Go the extra mile. The halacha is the halacha. Just go the extra mile. Do a little bit more. And that's why.
Right. If the halacha possibly allows you to show that midah, you have to show it.
Right. Now, not doing it does not make you a bad guy.
Right.
It doesn't make you a bad guy because you fulfill the halacha. You fulfill what the Torah says. But if you can, and you can say, what? Rabbi Yossi, he had to go and with this trickery and try to trick the guy and say, hey, you're not allowed. It's hefker. You can't do it. Why do they have to do that? Why did he put himself in that position? Because he saw what was going on, and lefnim b'shur sadin, he wanted not to rely on lefi chvodo. So he said, it's hefker, and someone else can take it, and I've given you the money, you haven't lost anything, now move on. So I mean, and that's the way of a tzaddik, that's the way of a chassid, someone who takes that view and says that, I'm going to do everything I can to make it a little bit better.
Quick comment. So, number one, I have to agree with what Yale said about Rabbi Einenberg. I mean, he knew, and a good Rav knows how to handle different situations with different
Right.
people. But the classic example I've heard, and not in general, is going to the Almana idea that somebody calls up or brings a chicken there Shabbos to the rabbi.
That was Ramesh's case.
Oh,
Right.
okay, was it the chicken? Okay, I know you said that.
Yeah, it
And,
was the chicken. It was the chicken where the Talmud said, well, you just gave a psak halacha that you shouldn't eat that chicken.
Right.
Why are you saying different? So that's what Chaim said. He found a way to yes, because it's a borderline question. It's not kosher, but for some people, fine.
Right.
Don't rely on it.
The almana might be a situation she doesn't have the money to
exactly.
turn around and go and just buy another chicken.
Exactly. And that's where you have to use your seichel. And that's why the Torah says on that pasuk of Chorva Yerushalayim is that because they did not look out for their fellow man, therefore the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, because the Torah gives us the halacha, but the Torah gives us the leeway to understand the halacha. That's why, the Kaviyachal, the Chazal that says that the Malachim said to the Rebbeinu Shalom, why are you giving, Torah should be reserved for us, for the Malachim. Why are you giving it to Klal Yisrael, to Basav Adam? So the Chazal said that he gave it to Basav Adam because the Basav Adam has to use his seichel to understand the halacha. For a Malach, it's simple. It's black or it's white. But for us, it's not black or white. And Rav Moshe and many of the Gedolim always used to say, he used to say, specifically Rav Moshe used to say, the Rebbeinu Shalom will have no taina on me if I took a chamor and I made it a kula. The Rebbeinu Shalom will have a taina on me if I take a kula and make it a chumrah. In other words, it works both ways. To take something that you could do and say no. No is an easy thing to say. It's always easy to say no. It's harder to say yes and come out with a yes. And that was the godless of Rav Moshe. Now, other Gedolim, there are others who maybe take a different view. Again, that's a different story. But for the most part, a person who's a Paisek has to understand that Psak Halacha is more than just the black letter of the Torah. It's also what's written between the letters. And that's why this drasha of Vahadata, which Yisro gave to Moshe, he said, these are the elements. Now, what is each element? And he went from one to the next, and at the end he said, but you know what? Like we say, Elad Vam Shem Lam Shiur, we go, the Talmud Torah Keneged Kula. So this is the same thing. Here, this is a mitzvah, this is a mitzvah. But you know what? At the end of the day, the Fnim Mishur Sadin is overarching. You can do all of these things, but if it comes to shove, Lefnim Mishur Sadin, just go the extra step. So that's how we end the Gemara. So we're running almost a little late. I thought maybe we just start the next Mishnah and we'll pick it up. It's a different concept, but it's an interesting concept. Let me just quickly introduce the Mishnah. So now we've ended this sugya. Says the Mishnah in Lamed Amud Beis, Ezu Aveda. So the Mishnah is going to tell us, how do you define an Aveda? And I think, Rick, maybe that went to your question when we started out, and we talked about, so you find a goat along the way. So here is where this Mishnah and Gemara is going to get into that question. How do you know it's an Aveda? How do you know something is an Aveda? That's what the Mishnah is telling us. Ezu Aveda. So the Mishnah says the following: Motza chamor or para roam baderech. If you see an animal grazing along the way, Ezu Aveda. Now you have to use a little seichel here. You're walking along the way, and you're driving on a Sunday afternoon, and it's a beautiful day, and you see some animals grazing. Are they lost? No. We presume that they're there with the knowledge of the owner and that they're grazing. Chamor v'kelev hafuchid. If you find a chamor that has fallen under its burden and it's lying there with the kelim sort of sprawled, pora rotza ben akramim, or, and this is going to be an important concept, a cow running through the vineyard. So from that, says the Mishnah Harizu Aveda, from that you extrapolate with your seichel that there is a problem here. Does it look like a problem? No. Well, maybe yes. In other words, you have an animal that's fell under its burden, or a cow that's running through crummin. Why crummin? Because crummin have thorns. So if a cow runs through crummin, that means it's going to be scratched by the thorns. So from that, says the Mishnah, using your seichel harizu aveda, right? Says the Mishnah, hachzira uvracha afila arba v'chamisha pamim chayv lachzira. 4 or 5 times, if you want to return it and it runs back, and in other words, this animal refuses to stay where you want it to stay, and it keeps going back into the kramim, you can't say I did my thing and that's it. You've got to, even 4 or 5 times, says the Mishnah, you have to return it. Shenema hoshev teshivim, that you have to return it, and the hoshev teshivim does not have a limitation. Okay, let's just finish the Mishnah. Hayabatel misela. This is a very interesting concept. You are doing work. Let's say you have a job. Someone says, "Do this job for me. I'll give you $100." So you're not working on the clock. You're working on the job, and after you finish the job, you're going to get $100. Hayabatel misela. So now you're going to get $100 for that job, and all of a sudden, you're diverted because you see an Aveda. Now you've got to go ahead and do Hoshev Teshivim. Are you going to get $100 for Hoshev Teshivim? Says the Mishnah, Lo Yomar, if you are doing a job and you get the money for the job, you should not say, Ten li sela, give me $100 for the return of the lost item. You give him an hourly wage. An hourly wage may be $25. So if it takes an hour or a half hour, whatever it is, to return it, then he's going to lose money, right? $100, he would be there all day. I agree. It'd be more work, but at the end of the day, he's going to get rewarded for his work. Instead, he has to divert his attention to the Aveda. And says the Mishnah, no, you don't give him $100. You give him like a poet, like a worker. You give him $25. Right? So, and he's going to say, wait a minute, I just lost $75. What did we say last week? That one of the exemptions to Hoshev Teshivim is when there is a loss of money. In other words, if by requiring me to fulfill the mitzvah, remember, L'fnei Mishur Sadin, separate. We're not talking L'fnei Mishur Sadin. We're talking according to the halacha, if you are going to lose money by doing something, you don't have to fulfill the mitzvah if it's a personal loss. So here, if he's going to get schar kapoel, he's going to lose $75. So says the Mishnah, in Yesham Bezdin, if he's in a place where you can quickly convene a Bezdin, Masna B'fnei Bezdin, then he stands before Bezdin and he says, I'm prepared to do Hashavas Aveda, but I'm not going to do it at the expense of losing $75. And the Bezdin can say, okay, we're going to, you're entitled to your money, do the Hashavas Aveda. So if he stands before a Bezdin and he refuses, he says, I'm not going to do this. I have an out. Last week we said the out is that he's going to lose money. But he says, I'll do it if you pay me what I'm supposed to get paid for my work. So even though he's going to do far less work, because he was supposed to do this work, let's say for 5 hours and get $100, and here he's going to work an hour, but he's going to lose his other job, right? Because if he diverts, the other guy's going to say, don't do me favors, I'll find somebody else. He's entitled to his money. In Ein Sham Bezdin, Mipnei Mi Yasne, Shalo Kodem. He comes first, like we said last week, that if there's no Bezdin and the fellow says, can you help me? I need to get this item back. And he says, wait a minute, if you don't pay me what I'm entitled to, I won't help you. He's perfectly with his rights. Now, the L'fnei Mishur Sadin separate, we won't, I mean, that's a separate question. The question is, Al Pi Halacha, did he do the right thing? The answer is yes, because we have an exemption for Shalo Kodem, that even though, Chaim, we said that always you have to look out for your fellow man and do good and fine and good, but not at your own expense. Why? Because if you look at the very top of Laman the base, what was the punchline? Lo yeh b'cho evyon. The top of the Laman the base, the punchline was that you shouldn't become a poor man. Shalach kodem. Take care of yourself first. Make sure that you have what you need, then help somebody else. Don't neglect your needs to help somebody else. That's already a different parsha, and we don't expect it of you. Maybe yes, maybe no. Okay, so it'll be a clash between the Mishur Sadin and Evyon. If you can adjust that and say, I'm not going to be an Evyon even if I help my fellow man, Tava Allah bracha, then it's better. But to give up your livelihood, and by the way, this is what we should in our own lives. I mean, we always want to look to help somebody, but there is a mitzvah of shalcha kodem that you have to look out for yourself first. So this is the Mishnah. Again, there's a lot of nuances to this Mishnah. We'll pick it up next week and go into the more detail. But again, the whole practical question of what is an Aveda becomes now front and center, because not everything that looks like it's an Aveda is an Aveda. So you have to, again, we're required to use our own seichel and to evaluate the situation and determine whether what we've done, what the circumstance is, whether that's an Aveda or not. So that's the Mishnah Mitzvah. We'll pick it up next week and we'll go into detail.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.